Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Nic and I talk about personality and work culture. We talk to Kristen Rowe about corporate sustainability, human-centric work culture, and starting a business. And finally, Black widow spiders are arachnids that are known for the female's unique and striking appearance, as well as their rumored tendency to eat their mates. Oh, I like that. They are considered to be one of the most venomous spiders in North America. However, their bite is rarely fatal to humans. Oh, I didn't know that. The venom of the female black widow is 15 times stronger than the rattlesnakes, and they have the ability to paralyze large prey. Wow, that's crazy. Hit that music. The annual NAEP conference and training symposium will occur coming up very soon, Sunday, May 5th through Wednesday, May 8th at the Renaissance Minneapolis Hotel in Minneapolis, Minnesota. There's always a great time, and we'll feature your favorite planning sessions with a regional fair. Register at www.naep.org, and we'll see you there.
Let's get to our segment.
What do you want to talk about, Nic?
Well, I mean, she talked about using more robust personality type systems to, engage employees. And we're literally doing that right now for our staff at Dawson, which has been a really fun exercise that we've just started to give people kind of
not using Disc-Spriggs.
No, we're not. No, we're using Clifton assessments, which is more like the reason I like it anyway is because it gives you a range of characteristics because like we talked about in the interview, nobody is ever just one thing, or you're not just introverted or just extroverted. It doesn't put it in that framework. It puts it much more in you have a tendency to like this, you have a tendency to prefer repeating tasks over and over, and that gives you satisfaction, or you like to do these different things. And there's lots of them. So it's not just one thing that you're reading.
Yeah.
And so, because sometimes people are like that, you have quadrants and they do all these things. Oh, you're these two things. And even that isn't real. It's not like people are that simple, but it's, it's more like, I like it because it's kind of like consistently who you are.
Right. Well, she mentioned the enneagrams, which I think is similar because it has your main tendency and then what you kind of fall back on.
Yeah. And I think that's the one that's I think that's the one that gives you champion or something like that. Really cool terms. I think it's that one. Or it's you're a commander or something like that. But what's that?
Well, it has numbers.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, but there's lots of different ones. I don't think there's ever necessarily one that's the one, to use. It's really more about what you and your team find valuable, I think. And you have to go into it with a healthy dose of this does not mean that you are always this way. It doesn't mean that you are only this category. I think if you can, reiterate that, I think people tend to accept it a little bit more,
I want to know what is yours?
Oh, what is my chart? So mine was I'm ideation, right? So I love coming up with new ideas. I love thinking about complex problems and how to solve them in unique and new ways. A ranger, which is I like to sort complex things into bite-sized chunks, and empathy, which is, pretty self-explanatory, right? I am, when people need to vent, I'm a good person to do that with. I can understand where people are coming from. Developer, which is probably my personal favorite, because it's like the coach one, right? Where you love to bring out the best in people and help them see their full potential. And then the last one I got was strategic. And so those are my top 5 anyway. And so strategic is exactly what it sounds like. You like to strategize, think up new ways to get work and how that can come to be. You can kind of look at it as an overall theme. It tells you it's probably good for me to be in marketing. It's probably good for me to be in a leadership role because I'm going to really enjoy bringing people up. That helps the organization, right? So there's kind of those combined themes, which fits really well with what I do. So it was really fun to see. Everybody's got different ones, and I like to remind people that there's no right way to do things. And even if I have a good one for my job, it doesn't mean that's the only way to do my job. And I think people sometimes forget that. So that's me. That's what I am. So I don't know. What do you think, Laura? Do you approve?
Do you remember that all off the top of your head?
Yeah, but I kind of have to, right? I have to talk about it a lot. So, I got to at least have an idea of what it is.
Right. Yeah, I feel like as you're saying it, it's like, are those your things because that's what you would have done, or are those your things because that's what you do?
Right, exactly. In theory, that assessment is not supposed to change a whole lot, which, but it does. If it's been like a decade or so, sometimes it'll change. And so the last time I took it was like 10 or 12 years ago, and it was slightly different. So I didn't have the developer or the arranger. So I picked up mentorship and executive skills, but it doesn't mean I don't have those other things either. It's just what came through. And so, it's a funny point though, because it's also how I see myself, right? And it's my evaluation of me, which sometimes can also be a little biased. And so we're also going to try to do a 360 evaluation where other people tell you how they see you, which is almost a little more helpful, right? Because that's really how the world sees you, not just how you see yourself. It doesn't mean those aren't both valuable, but yeah, I think that's the next step for us.
Yeah, I think without having a third party evaluate whether they think that the things that it came up with, like, you know, plus having your employees tell you to your face whether they think that, like, oh no, you're not a great strategizer. Like, so doing the 360 with a third party person makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, exactly. And it's anonymous too, and you have to find the right people, because it honestly, like, one of the things I try to reiterate is we're different things to different people. We have different relationships with different people. So you may use like a part of your personality a little bit more in one area or a little bit less in another, because again, people aren't static. We're not just ones and zeros. So yeah, exactly. That's why it's important to have that independent evaluation too.
Right. All right, cool. Well, it sounds like that's progress over there on the culture side. So let's get to our interview and see what Kristen has to say.
Perfect.
Hello and welcome to EPR. Today we have Kristen Rowe, the CEO and founder of NextGen ESG and LCA on the show. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. So walk us through your experience here. Like you have 2 degrees in engineering and international affairs. So how did those 2 things come together, and how does that lead you to where you are today?
Yeah. So when I started out in college, like most people, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I was really excited about engineering and science and thought I wanted to be like an international business person. So I just kind of leaned into that. And as I kind of went along in my college career, started to really take an interest in more the environmental engineering side, just through different projects I got involved in, different initiatives. So the international affairs degree has been useful just from a liberal arts perspective. But yeah, after college, or as I was graduating college, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, decided to just stay in school to avoid working.
Me too.
I also just didn't feel quite prepared. And so I was looking at different graduate programs and really leaned into the environmental side. So I went to Duke to get my Master of Environmental Management. And then, of course, I couldn't avoid working any longer. So yeah, I applied to different positions right out of grad school. And the one that was most appealing to me was a consulting position, and have been in consulting pretty much ever since.
Very, very cool. So before we dive into your consulting career, because that's right up my alley, you did your graduate research in New Zealand. You had a project in New Zealand. Is that true?
Yeah, that was really cool. Well, on the surface, it sounds really cool.
It does.
So there was a professor at Duke who was transitioning over to the University of Auckland and trying to create a partnership with the Duke school. And so I was the guinea pig, which had some great moments and some not so great moments. But yeah, got the chance to go over there. It was a beautiful country, as I'm sure everyone has heard, and spent what was my summer, of course, in New Zealand, the other side of the world. So not their summer there, and got to do some sightseeing as well as some research. The topic area was around local water contamination, and there was a connection to the Maori people, or the native people there. There had been a site that had been contaminated. So I was just doing some research around that. So that was a really cool experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, how did that relate to what you ended up doing for your work?
Yeah, great question. So at the time in graduate school, I was focused on like a concentration, they called it, which was water and air resources. And I was doing research around water contamination and ground contamination. And then kind of towards the end of my graduate career, I pivoted a little bit and started to take some courses in climate science and policy. And so my final concentration actually ended up being more climate focused, but all of that coursework obviously counted. And because it was a master's degree, didn't really need to differentiate. Mm-hmm. So when I started out in consulting, I was at an all environmental consulting firm. So we weren't, sustainability wasn't even really a thing at the time.
Right.
And so I was kind of like toggling across all different disciplines within that as a junior staff, doing groundwater sampling and soil sampling and phase 1 and 2 site assessments and air permitting. So it was a great, I think, foundation to be able to have that diversity and exposure.
Yeah. So, and then, which is honestly, that's one of the benefits of consulting, right? When you work at a firm like that, especially larger ones, you have a lot more opportunity to figure out, what do I actually like to do? So is that kind of how you decided to start your own company, or it just kind of come to you a different way?
I think that's pretty much how it happened, right? So you start to, if you have the freedom within your job, right, to be able to, and the flexibility to be able to try different projects, which I feel very fortunate that I was able to do that, then you start to learn what you like. And then, if the leadership is okay with you leaning into the things that you really like and leaning away from the things that are not, not as passionate about, then I think that's what makes consultants really happy, right? And so right early in my career, a few years in, when I started to kind of figure out, what I did and didn't like quite as much. I mean, there wasn't really anything that I didn't like. It just was my preference. Sustainability started to really emerge in the U.S. Also, in parallel, EPA's greenhouse gas mandatory reporting rule was coming out in the early days, which is not directly connected, but still has obviously lots of companies are looking at their greenhouse gas emissions in their sustainability program. And because I had done some related undergraduate and graduate research in this area and had an interest in it, I was able to get connected to that work in the early days when the company I was working for didn't have a huge team of experienced practitioners. So I was able to lean into that. And then everything just kind of built off of that. I still did support a lot of like kind of traditional environmental compliance work earlier in my career, even after that point. But that's kind of how I started to really focus after the first 3 or 4 years in sustainability. And so since then, that's really been a focus area for me.
Yeah. And so even having the idea is wonderful, right? I'm going to start my own company. This is going to be so easy, right? This is going to be, even if you don't have, your eyes in the sky, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. So how did you kind of get through those initial steps? Because even like the idea of it sounds incredibly daunting to me. So how did you get through it?
Well, I wouldn't quite say I'm through it, but I have launched my own company successfully.
I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. So I think, it was a good 15 years of consulting and working for both a large and then a smaller firm that I also helped grow prior to launching NextGen that gave me a lot of experience, a little bit of confidence, and just an understanding of what might work really well and what might not. And I think seeing different cultures within consulting, both from my own personal experience as well as, as I built out teams and led teams and supported teams, kind of hearing their stories around like what was the great aspects of their consulting work and the not so great aspects, I think really helped me understand, at least formulate for myself and the team here at NextGen, kind of what we're looking for in terms of our mission.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about it. What is your mission? What's your day-to-day?
So, I think at the core, the way we make money, obviously, is providing consulting services, but that's just a means to an end, right? I think the thing that I'm most excited about is the namesake NextGen really has significant meaning in that we are trying to run a NextGen culture that is really prioritizing the human experience, really making human connections, understanding how relationships with our teammates, with our clients, with our different stakeholders and partners make or break kind of your work experience, and how you can really lean into that to cultivate a healthier work environment or navigate different tricky situations, right? Because at the end of the day, we're humans first and professionals second. And if we can't get that right, we can't get the professional part right. So we have a lot of very intentional infrastructure that we're building out around just trying to help cultivate the whole human here to the extent you can in a professional setting. So that's kind of part of NextGen. The other part is that we are integrating artificial intelligence like lots of organizations. Of course, that's not entirely unique, but trying to do it, as accelerated as possible and trying to keep up with the trends in order to not only enhance the value that our work can bring in day to day in terms of how we do our work, but also in helping bring understanding and expertise to our clients, because a lot of the work we do is very data and information heavy. And historically, a lot of human labor has gone into that. And AI is automating that and advancing, has the potential to advance sustainability at a pace beyond what any of us, I think, could even imagine. And so really trying to help our clients get to that point so that they can focus more on impact than data collection, reporting, et cetera. And then, of course, for me, I have kids. So, doing this, what gets me up every day is them. And so I think about that in my day-to-day life. And if I'm coming to work and my people aren't happy and I don't feel happy and I'm not fulfilled as a whole person, I can't serve them as well. And so from the human side, that's important. But then also, I am really passionate about environmental causes. And I think getting to work with both small and very large companies is where I can have a lot of impact from a pure environmental impact standpoint.
Yeah. And I mean, that you touched on something that's really something I think about all the time, right? So when you're in a position where you're not just doing a service, you're not just providing service for clients, you're also providing value to your team members. And if you don't do your job, a lot of people can be hurt by that, if financially or otherwise. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure. You can say you've got a family, you've got kids. How do you manage that pressure?
Through many years of therapy.
I love that answer. Great. Yeah.
I mean, I think, it's not quite as taboo anymore to talk about mental health, but that's just as important as physical health and all the other things. And I think, again, coming back to the human experience, the human connection piece, we all wake up every day with different emotions and different experiences that are shaping the emotional state that we might be in from one moment to the next. And I think it's been a long journey. We're all human. We're all going to have both positive and afflictive emotions. Just identifying ways to, first of all, just recognize that and then manage it is really important. So that's not to say that I don't ever feel stressed or angry or, all of the things, but I feel like I've built a toolbox just to help manage it. And then, just trying to keep perspective on what really matters in life. At the end of the day, the work is really important and keeping the business afloat, especially now as the leader of the company, is really important. But again, we have to balance all of the things across our lives in order to be able to feel like we're managing things well.
Yeah, exactly. And I say, I love the idea too. So many times we love to put labels on things. Someone's an introvert or an extrovert. And if you talk to any one person and you ask them to give them a story about being alone or being in a group of people, they'll have many. So no matter what, people do extroverted things all the time. People do introverted things all the time. It's really hard to say, I'm only this, right? And it almost limits people's way of thinking. I'm an introvert. I can't talk to human beings. Have you talked to human beings? Yes, a lot, actually, now that I think about it, right? So it's kind of one of the funny things we like to talk about on the show, because so often people get really confused on that. So I love to hear it. I really, really do. But tell us, what interesting projects are you working on? So you got the framework, you've got the setup. What are you working on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, I think all the projects are interesting.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so we have one of our projects is with the beef production company. They are implementing some practices to reduce the emissions from their cattle and pursuing some carbon credits around that. So that's an interesting project just to explore the kind of scientific analysis, data collection around those reductions and what the potential is in the marketplace for carbon credits and how that might benefit stakeholders. We are doing some life cycle assessments, which is, I think the most familiar thing kind of to the audience could be a product carbon footprint. We're seeing a lot more transparency around carbon. A great example, not our client, but just a tangible example is Panera. The fast serve restaurant company has on their menus cool foods and warmer foods and, all related to a carbon footprint. So we've got some interesting projects around that and helping companies really communicate what the potential environmental advantages are of their projects. And then, I think the biggest focus area kind of in the ESG sustainability space, just hands down across the board, is around climate. So We're doing a lot of work on creating baselines, on decarbonization strategies, on thinking about communicating to stakeholders. And then, of course, the conversation is now becoming a lot more about business risks and opportunities related to climate and converging with those financial conversations, not just doing it for the right reason or because we don't want to see the effects of global warming and the impacts on society and our ecosystems, but also how does it directly affect the bottom line of the company? And so I think that's something that is transforming the landscape, the business landscape, on how we talk about some of these ESG topics, because we can still have all the benefits that are, feel good and we're doing right for society and helping the various ecosystems, but also it makes business sense for some of these initiatives, it was harder to connect the dots over the years previously.
So do you feel like people are getting more, not acceptable, but, easier to buy into bringing this into their companies? Or do you still have to do a lot of education and sales and try to twist people's arms into saying, this is why you should do this? Or are people becoming more like, I know I need to do this and why, just looking to hire you?
Yeah, great question. I think it's more so the latter. And I'm definitely not the pushy salesperson type, but I'm happy to kind of educate and step back and have that conversation around what does and doesn't make business sense and really focus that on, at the end of the day, you still have a product or service to deliver. And we want to make sure that, these investments on the climate side or on the product carbon footprinting side make business sense and actually add business value, as opposed to just, you should do it because it's the right thing to do. Right. And so there is some education because the landscape is rapidly evolving. There's so much information out there. There's so many new regulations. There's so many new guidelines. There's different entities providing, what they would consider best in class guidance, and it's acronym soup. And so the education piece is really just helping, those clients or those potential clients just get on the same page with what's important, kind of where to focus their efforts. But typically, I think there's just a lot of recognition in the marketplace that these initiatives are important. And obviously, depending on an individual's position within an organization, there might be different drivers and motivations for that. But I think it's much less arm twisting than perhaps it might used to be.
Right. And then when you're working with these clients, is there any particular aha moment or lessons learned that, at some point the client is like, well, this is cool. But then at some point they're like, oh, we love this. Like, is there a turning point or anything?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's something that I experience, I would say fairly routinely, that is really one of my favorite pieces of these engagements is, like, as a community, we're really focused on data transparency and collecting data and analyzing data. And it's almost, I use the phrase perfection is the enemy of the good, because the numbers will never be perfect, but when will they be good enough? And so really getting to that point as quickly and efficiently as possible, like really minimizing the internal strain on how much data we need and how much analysis we need to do. Of course, it needs to be robust and it needs to meet this or that standard or regulation, but kind of getting to the end and telling that story is like, at the beginning, I say, I don't think that X, Y, and Z is going to matter. So we're not going to focus, as much effort, time, and resources and budget on that. And then when you get to the end, you can tell a story like within your corporate value chain, here's where your most significant emission categories are. And here's what you might be able to do about it. The light bulb just goes off when you can get to that end point. And then you can very quickly, much more easily get to those conversations about what do we do about it, because it doesn't feel quite as overwhelming, because it's not, that all data matters. It's just that most of the data or some of the data matters, and it helps kind of ease that overwhelm a little bit.
Yeah, that's awesome. That makes sense. And from one female entrepreneur to another, congrats on starting your business. And
thank you.
For sake of time, move on to some other topics. But
sure.
The one that we wanted to start with is, because we all love animals here, witnessing a baby calf being born on a dairy farm. When did this happen? And
yeah,
passing by or
yeah, no, I think it was probably 12 plus years ago, fairly early on in my career, but when I had started to lean a little bit more into sustainability, and I got an amazing opportunity to go out to a farm in Kansas. It was a family farm, like generations, and they were raising dairy cattle across 3 or 4 different operations in the area. And we were there for several days doing some carbon footprinting and sustainability work. And we, of course, we would walk the grounds and they would tell us about their operations. And so just during one of those moments, a mama was giving birth to a calf, and it didn't take very long. And of course, they let us watch it. And it just was a really cool experience. We do, depending on what area you focus on in the environmental field, you more or less time kind of in the field or boots on the ground. And now in my current position, it's much more remote and kind of virtual desktop report, that sort of thing. So I always think back on that experience as something that was just really touching and impactful and memorable.
Yeah, that's awesome. We had another episode where Ron Deverman, who has a family farm, was talking about a tragic story. It was a different story. It was the same story, but different story.
Oh,
and I said, I appreciate your happy story. But yeah, and I think too, as environmentalists, we're not doing this just for the plants and the people, right? The animals and all of the things that are here too. So that's really awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that project did have some animal welfare components to it. And kind of going back to the human connection, this was a family farm. This was their livelihood. The work we were doing was not just like some numbers we're putting into a database, but like directly impacted them. So those bonds that I formed with those family members were also just really memorable as well. We even named one of their older cattle that had been there, that they chose not to send it off the farm even after she was productive. Can't remember the name, but that was kind of fun too.
Is that Bessie is the first thing that came to my mind. That's like a cow name.
It probably was something, commonplace like that.
That's very, very cool. So we have a thing on the show we call Field Notes, where we ask our listeners to share memorable moments about the work they do in the field. We encourage listeners to share their stories as well, using the hashtag Field Notes so we can share those on air. But yeah, so that was a really good story. Do you have another field story, maybe about spiders, that you'd like to share with us?
Yes. So yes, early in my career, when I was supporting kind of like site investigation remediation work, I got the great fortune to go out into the field and collect lots of groundwater and soil samples. And as a kid growing up, I was a tomboy and had no problems picking up the frogs and digging for worms. But I guess as I got older and life happens, you start to become scared of things. And so even though I love to protect the environment, I prefer it to stay out of my personal space. And a lot of this field work just involved kind of like more remote areas or areas where there were lots of spiders or snakes. And I just remember this one site that had a family of black widow spiders that lived in like the sampling well. And so we would have to like open the well and then carefully like put the sampling equipment and make sure we're not touching the black widow spiders. And so that was as close and as intimate as I have been to poisonous, I guess technically voluntarily been to poisonous animals.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That totally makes sense though. I mean, they're intense animals. It's it's a rational fear, I think.
Boats, they got ants in them, spiders, all the equipment shed is always full of creepy crawlies.
Yeah.
Yes. That's true.
Yes. And people would just make fun of me because I couldn't contain the fear.
Right. Oh, yeah. Golly, I had a coworker of mine once, like we came into it. We're in the forest. We came into a clearing and a turkey just flew away from a nest, but like right over her head. And she shrieked and then disappeared. I have no idea where she went. And I'm like at the clearing looking down at a nest of eggs. And I'm like, what on earth just happened? So it's okay. It could be way worse.
Thank you.
Yeah. We also love to make connections with who we are outside of our jobs. And one of the things we love to ask about is hobbies. And you are a former Division I soccer player and still love to play, and also a committed CrossFit athlete. So, I mean, sorry, Laura, but I'm going to ask her a bunch of soccer questions now. So where did you play?
Well, I got recruited to Lafayette College, which is Division I Patriot League, but kind of nerded out, very quickly realized how much commitment it would be to continue with all of the practices and games and travel. So within the first year, I actually left the team, and it wasn't a party or anything like that. It was because I went to a activities fair, an extracurricular activities fair. And I was like, well, I want to be able to do all these things. And how can I play soccer and do this? And so I ended up leaving the team and just doing intramurals and stuff. But I did play for a little bit on the Lafayette team.
I mean, that's still extremely cool. And so you're in the Raleigh area. Do you ever follow the Raleigh Courage by any chance?
Yeah. So I think they're part of the NCFC division. And now that I have kids who are coming up the ranks in soccer, it's a whole empire of soccer players. So yeah, we go to those games sometimes. I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm a devoted fan,
Right.
but definitely have got to see some of the games and be a part of the action.
That's super fun. Yeah, and truthfully, same. So it's always a challenge. I mean, how much has that changed? I remember when I was a kid, and like soccer was always kind of like the maybe fourth sport that they wanted you to try. But I feel like that's changed a ton. Have you seen that kind of shift?
I mean, I grew up in the Northeast. And so I think there's also just perhaps something, and I now that I live in Raleigh in the South, there might be cultural. I feel like soccer is huge here. And like the leagues are very competitive and intense. So I don't know if it's shifted over time or I just wasn't a part of that integrated culture. But of course, there's lots of other sports and things that kids do as well. So
yeah, that's really cool. So okay, anyway, so you also do CrossFit, which by itself sounds super intense. Is it? Is that a challenge? Because to me, like, I don't even know if I could get started with it. It just seems like really like I have to my eyes have to be open at all times. I'm not allowed to blink in order to get involved. Am I wrong? What do you tell me about it?
So I think it's a really great question because first of all, CrossFit can be for any stage of fitness. And the reason I actually started was because I really did want to challenge myself. And then something I realized as I was going to it, it was truly kind of an escape and my kind of one of my investments in my mental and physical health because it is so challenging. I can't focus on anything but the exercises and the workout when I'm there because if you do, you'll just get hurt.
Yeah.
And I used to think it was so intimidating. And I actually have only been doing it for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. So there are people who've, done it for a decade and are really into it. And so I just love that I can show up every day and get a little bit better each day. And, like I said, it's for all fitness levels. It definitely requires a certain mindset and you have to really love kind of more the intense physical exercise. It's, if you love more so yoga or some of those more gentle exercises, which CrossFit is not better or worse than, you might not be interested in CrossFit, but it's just been really fun to challenge myself and have goals outside of work to kind of progress towards.
That's very cool. Yeah, I challenge myself. I'm the kind of person like I don't know how to play a sport that's not 110%, which is not always a good thing, right? It doesn't mean you get better at it. It just means it's like you have to swing harder, right? No. Calm down, breathe, swing through, kind of stuff. And sometimes it's too much.
Yes, for sure. And it's definitely humbling because in something like CrossFit, there's always going to be lots of people that are better than you.
Yeah. Man, oh gosh. If you ever want to get over that, you just go on a ski slope as an adult and watch 5-year-olds do flips over your head, and you're like, okay, yeah, it's fine. I don't have to be, there's like athletic and then there's athlete. You don't have to be at the top. You can just be fit.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, I'm more one of those persons who prefers yoga. I just like to sweat.
Yeah.
And that's great. I think I should do more yoga in my life and probably a little bit less CrossFit. I think that would benefit me.
We'll both have some moderation here. Okay, so we're running out of time, but I want to ask you one more question about the work. So jumping back into work after we jumped out of it, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the human-centric aspect of your company and what are the actual initiatives that you do to maintain your employees' wellness. And that would be what most companies are not doing.
Sure. Yeah, no, I love that question. And because we're kind of newer and smaller, it's not the fancy, like we pay X hundreds of dollars for gym memberships and that sort of thing. Of course, we would love to get there. But at this stage, it's really about self-awareness, interpersonal development, and really vulnerability, having those open, candid conversations in a professional context, of course, and helping kind of raise awareness and educate staff through different training programs and frameworks that we're building out or the leadership team has used over the years. One example you or listeners may have heard of is the Enneagram framework that is becoming a little bit more mainstream in the business setting. It's a personality typing and, just like the Myers-Briggs, that sort of thing, but I think it's a little bit more in depth. So kind of starting to learn about how you may see the world is different from how other people may see and perceive the world, and how you prefer to receive communication or is most resonant with you might be different than other people. And then that becomes a light bulb moment because you realize, oh, wait, like they don't see the world the way that I do. And so I may need to tailor how I'm communicating or how I'm receiving or how I'm interpreting things. And I think that's just, it's a slow burn, right? Like it's a muscle, like you have to keep exercising it. It has to be integrated into your day-to-day culture. But what it does is it cultivates some of those harder conversations that other organizations may not be encouraging to have around work. I mean, there's work conflicts that come up all the time, if you're frustrated or whatever. And that doesn't mean that it has to be a focus of your everyday existence, but that there's mechanisms to resolve healthfully and in a very productive way, and ideally conflict avoidant way, working through some of those interpersonal issues that you inevitably face when you work with other human beings.
Yeah. And it's incredible because people sometimes need to be reminded in different ways that people are different. It's amazing. You would think it would be everybody would just know that, but they don't. They so don't.
Absolutely. And I mean, even when you realize that, or you practice it, or you see the benefits, you still have to remind yourself. And being a parent as well, it's something that I'm trying to teach my kids. And I sometimes just take a breath and I'm like, right, they're not seeing the world. Let me try this a different way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the mark of a good coach, right? Sometimes the best players aren't the best coaches because the best players don't have to think about how to do something the way, someone who doesn't have the most natural talent does. And so
absolutely,
they make better coaches because they know, oh, this is how I got better. Here's lots of different ways for you to do the same thing. Very cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, some of the bigger companies, they jump right to providing, here's a health plan that gives you therapy and here's a gym membership, but then we're not going to have these conversations at work. And then there's a disconnect, right? Because like, if I have to go talk to my therapist about work every day, but I can't talk to my boss about what I'm going through, then I'm probably not likely going to fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, all of those are important, obviously, but one of the things that I have to remind myself of, and as I kind of mentioned the phrase vulnerability, it's something that I try and wear on my sleeve because you do feel uncomfortable sometimes bringing these topics. But one of the things I know that I'm working on is slowing down to have those conversations and create that space because, I do have a lot going on and I am trying to juggle lots of balls. And I just have to remind myself that equally important of this deliverable or this client objective is to make the space for my team and I to have those conversations.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But we are officially running out of time. Is there anything else you want to talk about that we did not touch on?
I think the only other thing that I'll share is it's just been a great career journey for me. I think at the stage that I'm at, kind of lots of stuff that I've worked on in my personal and professional life are coalescing together. And so I feel like there's just harmony. And it's like I see things that I'm leaning into in my personal life, helping my professional life and vice versa. And so I think that's kind of part of the beautiful aspect of, what I've learned and the culture I'm trying to create at NextGen is that it doesn't have to always be, here's my work life and here's my professional life in a silo. Like we can have more of a spectrum where those things kind of work together infinitely.
Yeah. I mean, it's even like doing things like being able to work from home on certain days, or even, just having that as an option in general helps a lot of people, so very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
So where can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So LinkedIn, Kristen Rowe, Rowe is my last name, or you can visit our company website at www.nextgenesg.co.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen, for joining us today. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And that's our show. Thank you, Kristen, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.
Bye.